for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video I'll be giving the Belgian Dubbel my full guide treatment. In my usual style guide format I will begin with a little history before moving on to BJCP notes for competition, before sharing a recipe writing guide on one of my own tried and tested recipes to this style, along with recent brew day footage. I will then show you the finished beer and give you some tasting notes and impressions. So let's get started with a little history. The Belgian Dubbel style was originally brewed by the Westmalle Abbey Brewery back in 1856, but it was not until 1861 that it was made available for sale to the public. The original Dubbel was simply a stronger version of the Belgian brown ale brewed at the Abbey. By 1926 the recipe had been changed and a new beer style had emerged, with the Dubbel name being used by other breweries who emulated the beer style. Classic Belgian Abbey beers such as single, double, triple and quadruple are named as such due to the amount of fermentable sugars. Quite simply, a double has twice the sugars compared to a single, but half the sugars compared to a quadruple. In today's commercial beers of this style, these are simply marketing slogans, but useful all the same. Here are a selection of highly rated commercial beers to the style. The highest rated is on the left and has no label and is identified by its cap, which is shown, but I believe you will find each of these to be excellent examples of the style nevertheless. Let's now move on to the BJCP's impression of this beer style for competition, which I will condense for key information. Do note that this is simply relevant for competition under the BJCP. It would be fair to say that opinions do certainly vary on the BJCP's interpretation of this style, but it is offering some guidelines, so somewhat useful anyway. Let's start with aroma. Complex, rich, sweet, darky, malty aroma, moderate fruity esters, moderate to low spice, soft alcohol if present. Appearance. Dark amber to very dark, possibly with a red depth of colour. Large, dense and long-lasting creamy off-white head. Flavour. Similar qualities as aroma, balance is always towards the malt. Medium-low bitterness that doesn't persist into the aftertaste. Mouthfeel. Medium to full body, medium-high carbonation, low yet smooth alcohol warmth. Overall impression, moderately strong malty complex Trappist ale with rich malty flavours. Shown at the bottom of the screen now are the BJCP Vitals, and I've also added the all-important BU-GU ratio guideline to the right. This section is now complete. If you are one of my viewers that likes to screenshot this screen, then now it is ready for you. Let's now move on to my guidelines on how to write your own recipes to this style. I will follow after this with one of my own tried and tested recipes, which I suggest you brew as a good baseline for this style. Taste this and then adjust using these recipe guidelines to bring the recipe to precisely your own taste, if needed for the next batch. Pale ale or Pilsner malt will be your base malt here at 60% plus of the grain bill. Some brewers like to blend these together. Pale ale offers some more flavour, which can sometimes be a little bready, whereas Pilsner is much more crisp. A combination often allows you to narrow down the base malt's contribution. Next up we have sugar at between 5 to 20% of the grist. Do not be one of those misinformed brewers who believes that using sugar is cheating. It simply is not, and in this case it is actually part of the style. More often than not, for this style a darker type of candy sugar will be used to add in some great dark fruit flavours. This sugar adds to the drinkability of the beer because it lowers the body as well as the malty flavours. If you do not like the price of candy sugar, then you can certainly make your own. It does take a little practice, but most people get the hang of it by the second or third batch. Do note that using normal table sugar will not have the same effect at all as candy sugar, as candy sugar has been inverted and this creates unfermentable sugars that will remain within your beer, raising the sweetness a little. Next up we have Munich malt between 5 to 20%. This is a very popular choice for adding in some extra rich malt complexity and sweetness, along with a biscuit-like quality that can really make this style sing for many people. Next we have one of my favourite malts of all time. Special B malt or similar is a very wise choice in this style, as it will impart very complex flavours and aromas. These involve dark caramels and notes of plums, cherries, raisin and other dark dried fruits. As its name suggests, this is indeed a special malt and is one of the darkest of the Belgian malts available. Next we have the Old Faithful chocolate malt. This is not so popular for this style, but it is still used. This will bring along chocolate, dark fruit and coffee flavours into your profile. I especially recommend the chocolate malts sold by Weyermann if you can obtain them. They are available in both husked and dehusked versions, the dehusked being the less bitter of the two. Crystal malt also has a role to play in this style, though usually it is in the low colour version, often referred to as Carapils. Its job being to add in some extra head retention along with some background notes of caramel flavour. Lastly we have flaked maize, which is actually corn. This flaked type has actually had most of its protein removed and is used as a flavour stabiliser that also reduces body. It's a common commercial brewery style trick and one that I encourage homebrewers to try to experience the difference. Let's now talk about the hops. This style is certainly malt forward, but naturally you will need to balance its alcohol with hops at the very least, but it is common to add in a little extra hop flavour too. Popular types are now listed on screen. Be sure to keep the hops to noble varieties if you want this to be to style. Usually you will be adding hops for this style at the start of the boil and also at 15 minutes to the end of the boil for flavouring. Yeast-wise, there are various options out there and I'm sharing examples in both dry and liquid form at the bottom of the screen. To be authentic to this style, your chosen yeast should be fruity and spicy. One thing I've been doing a lot of experimentation with in the last year or two is co-fermentation with quake yeast. This allows the brewer to gain the flavours and benefits from more than one type of yeast. My first video of 2021, shown on screen now, gave an introduction to this topic. With this particular style we want the flavours from the Belgian yeast and the utility of fast conditioning from the quake. I have found that when performing co-fermentation with quake in my testing, it is best to pitch it at the same time as the flavouring yeast to gain its full conditioning power. Temperature is also key here, but I will give full details on this aspect later in this video during my tried and tested recipe brewing footage, which is coming right after the next section. Let's now look at ideal water profiles for this style. The profile shown on top of the screen is from the Westmalle brewery. This will give you an authentic effect, but having said this, many actually prefer a balanced water profile. An example of which is shown below, but good brewing software will have its own version of this anyway, so go with that if you're looking for balance. Let us now go through my tried and tested recipe to this style along with brew footage from a recent brew where I used the Grainfather G30. Naturally this recipe will suit other brewing systems also. I am sharing this recipe in full in this video's description and also via Brewfather via an internet link, which is also in this video's description, but you can also find it by searching on the Brewfather cloud. To convert the recipe to your brewing system on Brewfather, simply change the equipment section and scale it to the volume desired. You should then replace my ingredients with your own and ensure the values for IBU and gravity match that for the original. This is easily done by using the recipe in the video's description for reference alongside Brewfather on your screen. Let's get this mash started and go through the details of this recipe. This mash is a two-step plus mash out. It begins in the low range and then ends in the upper range for extra complexity and higher fermentables. This is very common in Belgian brewing. Shown on the left hand side of the screen now are the vital statistics and fermentables, which are shown in percentage form. Starting at the top, you will notice a slightly lower OG and FG than perhaps you would have expected compared to, say, American beer styles. Do not be concerned by this, as they will certainly balance each other out and this recipe will not be as dry as you might think. Some Belgian yeast ferments down very low for beer, but the end beer is still not dry due to the way they are balanced in terms of the bittering unit to gravity unit ratio. Let's take a look at the grain bill. You will note that I'm using Pilsner and no mix with Pale Ale. This is simply because I have found this is what the majority actually prefer, and because it simply lets the flavours from our speciality grain and candy sugar shine through just that little bit brighter. At 15% I have dark candy sugar. To my mind this sits best within this recipe in terms of its flavour contribution. Going up to 20% sugar for the majority seems to overpower the sugar flavour and lose too much body, but again I am talking about the average taste, which may or may not be your own. I've gone in at 10% with Munich, which is certainly allowing some extra rich malt flavours and boosts the sweetness of the dark fruit flavours nicely. You will not taste much biscuit from this malt at this level, but it will be there blending nicely with the sweetness and richness. This sweetness and rich quality is further enhanced by my use of Special B at 5%, which is the most I would recommend. It sings especially nicely at this level as long as you have not gone too far with your dark candy sugar. At 4% I have Carapils, which adds in some nice caramel notes to the far background of this recipe, which certainly do merge very nicely with the dark fruitiness that you will find in this beer. This is all nicely stabilised by the flaked maize, which at 2% will have very little effect on the body. With the flaked maize in mind, you may wish to add some rice or oat hulls in, as the things can get a little sticky even with these small amounts. After a very steamy sparge step, I am now at the pre-boil stage, just waiting for that last degree. I have to say that I am rather impressed after the amount of brews that I have completed on this system that it is still functional, but it is certainly showing its age when it comes to speed of heating compared to the newer brewing systems that I also now use. Shown on screen now on the right are the hop additions for this brew. I have gone all Saaz because quite frankly I believe its earthy, spicy and herbal flavours suit the style the best. There are 2 hop additions here, but I do not add the first until this protein head has been cleared at least mostly. So after that in goes the Saaz, and I just love the bright green colour that is characteristic with this hop. The other thing being that this brew was already smelling just awesome, and the Saaz has just given that a whole new dimension. Once the hops are all in, it is vital to give them a really good stir, otherwise you simply will not be getting the full benefit of them, and the herbal element will be hanging around on top for longer, rather than joining the rest of the trub on the bottom where it really should be. When it comes to adding the candy sugar, I would strongly suggest adding it into a hop spider. This will avoid issues with burning on the bottom for those that do not use a false bottom, but even if you do, then it's a good way to go for no fuss. I have been using a false bottom with my grain file for quite a long time now, and I've perched the hop spider on top of it for this step. It doesn't really matter when you add the candy sugar during the boil, and you will find that after a short period of time it will dissolve down to nothing within your hop spider. After a short cooling period, it was time to transfer and pitch the yeast, starting with the Voss Kvik and then the BE256. The order of pitching here is not important, but adding both types of yeast at the start certainly is. As per usual, I am aiming the cold wort directly at the yeast to give it a good rehydration. The temperature that I have found works best with this co-fermentation duo is 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Usually I find at this temperature with this duo, fermentation is usually done in between 7 to 10 days, and as I see it coming to an end I rise the temperature by 1 degree Celsius per day, ending up at 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. To finish this section up, I am now sharing a summary of this temperature information in both metric and imperial on screen. Do note that this information is just relative to this exact yeast pairing. If you wish to use a different Belgian yeast, then testing will certainly be needed, and I suggest doing small batch trials first, as I have done previously. After you have a good stable gravity, it is then time to add it into either a keg or carboy up to the neck for conditioning. This is ideally done at 14 degrees C or 52 degrees Fahrenheit. I used a storage room without heating and had an average of 16 degrees Celsius in the room and was certainly satisfied. If like me you're going to use a keg, then be sure to add in CO2 and burp the keg several times to remove all the oxygen. 3 to 4 weeks conditioning time like this due to the kvik will usually be enough. Then you can either bottle the end beer or like me add it to your kegerator. Moving ahead now by some weeks, let's get this one poured and some tasting notes together. I want to make it clear that this beer is about 4 weeks old, and that includes the fermentation time, so it is rather young, but with kvik involved, a 7% beer is not really an issue. The only thing that this one lacks at present is clarity, and naturally the kvik has not helped that at all. So here are my tasting notes, starting with aroma. This certainly has a rich, slightly sweet malt-like aroma with a touch of alcohol. When I was doing small batch testing of this one, I found that after some more aging, the aroma came out a little more in terms of its complexity, but that is not far from that level now. In terms of flavour, we have slightly sweet complex malt flavour with dark fruit. The BE256, formerly known as Abbey, has made its usual mark of spiciness and some banana in the background, which is essentially what I miss when I ferment this style with just kvik. Here are some notes. In terms of using this recipe as an entry into co-fermentation, this is pretty much ideal. Both the kvik and the Abbey yeast are both workhorses, so this turns around quickly in terms of fermentation. In terms of the end result, you probably would never have tasted such a complex beer in such a short turnaround. In terms of impression, I find this to be very much a sweet treat type of beer recipe that fools many people into thinking it is much stronger than it really is due to its complexity. I brewed this for Christmas because I consider it to be a nice indulgence kind of beer, but these are great all year round in my opinion too. So there you have it. I would be interested in hearing from anyone who brews this recipe to hear their own taste impression within this video's comments section. To join this YouTube channel's Facebook group, then please see details on screen. Membership is open to people of all experience levels. This now brings this video to a close. If you have any questions, then please let me know via YouTube or Facebook. I do hope that you found this video to be useful, interesting and enjoyable. If appropriate, then please like this video on YouTube, and if you've not done so already, then please subscribe. I regularly post new content. Happy brewing!